get started, just a little tech reminder for folks for questions throughout the conversation. Please use the chat box and go ahead and click on the little chat icon so it populates it on the right-hand side of your screen. And then also just to be able to see who all the peers and colleagues are who are in the meeting, clicking on the little participant icon to populate the left-hand side of your screen as well. Welcome everybody to our 6th West Seattle Bridge Community Task Force meeting. It is somehow only, but also already our 6th meeting. And folks have been doing a great job utilizing the mute button so that there isn't echo in the background. If you're not speaking, the audio from the presentation does echo and add some additional white noise that's hard to navigate through. So appreciate everybody keeping themselves on mute. We will continue to utilize the chat box as a great place to bring up questions, and I will do my best to raise those for folks, but you're also welcome to use the hand raising icon, and we will keep an eye out for those as well, though I acknowledge that that's a little harder to track than a chatted question. So with that, I think we can get started, and I will turn it over to Paulina to get us going.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome everyone to our community task force. Yes, number 6. Thanks for all your commitment, and we have received tons of emails on your feedback. We appreciate that. I want to welcome our top co-chairs, Barbara Moffett and Scott Phelan, who are joining us today. We're going to be going through the agenda in a few minutes. And Greg is going to turn us through the agenda to talk about the goals and some of the discussions that we'll be going today. Thanks for being here today. Greg?
Oh, Mayor Nichols, I think you're still on mute.
So I am having technical difficulties, not just with the mute button, but my printer went out and I'm not able to access the materials for today's meeting other than on the screen. So if you put the agenda up on the screen, I can describe it, but I don't have it in a version where I can actually read it here.
And apologies, Mayor Nichols, it looks like the shared content came out, but can everybody give a thumbs up if they can now see the shared content? Okay, at least see and Pauline. Okay, great. There is now something to look at. And so we'll advance one more slide, Adonis, and we'll be caught up to where we should be. Perfect, right there.
So we've got our breakout again today. As we think it's been successful in encouraging and allowing folks to participate much more fully, and so you should have a link for that. We're going to break out and we're going to talk with the co-chairs today, and I think we're going to get some very interesting information from them, and again have an opportunity to have a conversation with them. And then we're going to get the updates that we have been getting for the last 5 previous meetings that will let us know where the process is and how close we are to being able to make some fundamental decisions on what direction we're headed. So, and we're going to try and experiment at the end. We're going to report back from our groups, and we're going to try a feature that WebEx has to poll, to get your feedback through a poll mechanism in the WebEx platform. So I have no idea if that's going to work or not. We hope it does, and if it does, it's something we might be able to use later on as well. So with that, Heather, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about Reconnecting West Seattle. Oh, I'm sorry.
That is my plan after I unmute myself. Oh, Paulina.
Before we do that and get it to Heather, that's a good practice of our working group agreement. And thank you for those of you who've been following and also sending us feedback about this. But so it's a good opportunity to remember of what we agree on. So with that, Heather, please.
Thank you so much, Paulina and Greg. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the low bridge. If we could go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the low bridge access policy. We have a little bit of a recommended update. And I also want to give you an update on what we have heard so far from the Reconnect West Seattle surveys and neighborhood ballots. So the low bridge access policy. So as you know, emergency vehicles are still the top priority. SPD enforces those placards at peak periods. Right now, everyone is allowed to use the low bridge between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. School buses, maritime industrial users that are proximate to Harbor Island for work purposes, not for commuting, 22 employer shuttles, 8 van pools of essential workers, and 113 ILWU workers that need to use the low bridge to access Terminal 5 from the place where they are dispatched. Today's recommendation is that we add 2 more essential van pools to bring that total to 10, and then share 13 placards for the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce and the Junction BIA to share out among the businesses in West Seattle that need the low bridge for materials access and the rest. So we have had at least 2 other discussions about the low bridge access policy, and so I want to make very clear right now, if any of the panelists have a concern or some support for our additional 2 essential worker van pools and 13 placards for the West Seattle Chamber and the Junction BIA, now is the time to speak.
Anybody?
Deb Borker has a question. Please confirm essential van pools are not King County van.
They are King County van pools, but they are King County van pools that are serving hospitals primarily. They suit up in like full suits, so they are, though they cannot be physically distant in a van pool, they are completely covered up with all the necessary protective gear. Okay. It looks like we have some support from Vigor as well as anybody else? Anybody from the West Seattle Chamber or the Junction BIA have something to say here?
Can't get unmute. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah. Yes.
My mute keeps turning on every 3 seconds. If some.
Sorry, who's trying to speak? Maybe put it in the chat. We can try and unmute you on the back end if you're having trouble on your end.
Austin with the chamber's trying to speak. Muted every couple seconds.
Can somebody on the back end try and unmute Dan if he's having trouble on his end?
All right. Looks like you're good, Dan.
Oh, went back on. He's right.
Huh.
Sorry, it's muting him even when I unmute it remotely.
Sorry about that, Dan.
Are we? I think it looks like I'm unmuted.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Give it a shot.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I saw in the chat last week, and I've had a lot of pushback from members of the chamber and some investigation. Looks like the 113 ILWU passes from talking with the port is mainly for Friday access for a boat that comes in on Fridays. if that's incorrect, please correct me. We appreciate the 13 passes, but we do have 500 businesses over here that are in a recession with COVID and now lack of a bridge. And 13 seems a little light. 13 is better than 0, but we'd like to see if there's a potential, if that is accurate on the Friday need for the ILWU, if there could be opened up access Monday through Thursday for businesses that need to get down to DeSoto for supplies, electricians, construction, restaurant, bar, retailers that need to get down there. I understand that once a placard's given out, there's a concern that means that traffic should go across at any time. To offer a solution instead of just complain. We'd love to maybe suggest a second colored option. So a pass that's maybe whatever color's already been issued for Fridays, and maybe a Friday, Monday through Thursday is a red colored pass that would allow us access to that lower bridge. We're looking at 6 years of economic devastation for small businesses right now. And anything we could do more than 13 would be greatly appreciated from the chamber. And I'm assuming the Junction Association would be on board with that thought as well.
I wonder if I could call on John Persak to explain the ILWU situation. You have much more clarity on, because you live it than I do.
Sure, Heather. Appreciate that. What this has to do with is the actual operation of the facility and the ability to have timely processing of trucks and cargo in and out of the gate at Pier 5, as well as for the ships, the Matson ships and other ships that may call there in the future to come and go on time, which affects supply chain currently to Hawaii and potentially to other places. When people go into work, typically, they check in at the front office and they walk across the hall to go to their job. Well, the way it works for us is we go to our hall to get our job on a daily basis, and then we have to drive across that bridge to report to work, go to Terminal 5. And we receive our instructions on where to go, within an hour, literally, of when the job starts. So this has to do with the operation of the port. This is not about convenience. It is not people commuting to and from work. It is not about people going to the grocery store. And it is certainly not about any kind of expectation that we should have a priority, other than the fact that the port has an obligation to its customers. The terminal operators and the shipping company have an obligation to their customers. And the one of P5 is going to go online in June of next year. And so we're going to have this same conversation in June of next year, except it's going to be heightened because there's going to be more capacity needed in and out of those gates. So if we do not have this, the gates will be run late. These trucks will stack up. They will stack up down West America, which is already a problem because SSA is limiting their gate colors. And so we could have further conversations about what it looks like in terms of interim period where there's not going to be any activity, but we'll be back at this conversation in June, and it's going to be a bigger conversation. So that's how I'll address that. I'll take questions here or the chat or wherever. So appreciate the opportunity, Heather.
John, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for that clarity on our end. And this isn't about trying to limit the ILWU's access by any means. It's us. We also have customers and things that the small businesses need to support in West Seattle as well. And I think hopefully there could be a way where we could further discussion offline and see if, even if it's 1 or 2 days a week where you guys are lower capacity, that we could get a little more access, that our businesses could schedule Tuesdays, Thursdays are the days that we can run over this bridge and get what we need to get done for the week. So I would just, Heather, I'm not sure where to go with that from here, but I appreciate John's insight, and
Sure.
I still think there's an opportunity to support the small business community a little a little more than 13 placards at the moment.
So I actually would invite John and Dan. Maybe you guys could talk a little bit offline. Our limitation is that we can fit 160 additional vehicles on the bridge, and for purposes of our modeling, we have to assume that they're all going to show up at the same time. So if you guys have some ideas on how you could divide those things up, that's great. I do also want to remind everyone that these placards, we're only going to be using these placards through September when we start automated enforcement. And automated enforcement may provide us the opportunity for a little bit more finely grained enforcement. So my suggestion here would be that we move forward with this proposal, let Dan and Don have a little bit of a conversation between now and our next meeting, and then you guys can get back to me, and if you work something out, then maybe we can move forward with that. Does that sound acceptable for the moment?
This is Dan speaking. That sounds great, and I appreciate the panelists letting us have this chat at this time, so thank you.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that our hope was that this is the kind of conversation that we would have. I know it's hard when we're all remote.
Can I follow up just very quickly?
Yeah.
Before this placard system was introduced, we did have a system that allowed us to make adjustments for the days when there was ship traffic. And my understanding is there was not an appetite to try to run two systems. And so, my fear is we're going to head back into that conversation because that is the system that was working to accommodate, other people for those other days. So I'm not really sure where that goes, but definitely committed to having that conversation, and I'll definitely see where that goes.
Yeah, two systems didn't work for the Seattle Police Department, so that's why we're trying to stick with one. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? So this slide is so interesting. This has the Spokane Street bridge volumes by hour. And so you'll note that when we get down to that 9 p.m. hour, boy, oh boy, does everybody understand that is the moment when they can, when they're allowed to cross the low bridge. So I think our signage is working okay. I'll also note that that's the time when we are exceeding the volume of the bridge where that could start to impede emergency response. So this will continue to bring this data back to you. I also know notice that in the early mornings it's really low, and in the midday it's sort of in that mid range. It's not a typical traffic curve that we're seeing there. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a little bit of moment to give you an update on the Reconnect West Seattle survey and neighborhood ballots. It closed on the 31st, which was Friday. It opened up on July 10th. I think the number actually is higher now. We got a good 22% of all registered voters in District 1 to respond to this Mobility Action Plan survey. We feel really good about that. The neighborhood prioritization ballots, 1,600. Most of the responses came from the south part of West Seattle. Georgetown and South Park had a pretty good showing. Soto doesn't actually have a lot of folks who live there, so we weren't surprised by that. We did have surveys completed, 72 surveys were completed in language, and we have about 60 ballots that were completed in language, so all of those need to be translated and added into our data. Those paper surveys and ballots are still being collected. The final survey and ballot count will be available next week, so we'll make sure to update you with that. Most importantly, SDOT will be presenting an implementation plan to the task force on August 19th for your review and feedback. Our desire is to wrap that up so that we can start doing the work that is necessary to fulfill those things in September before it starts raining. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Paulina.
Heather is also going to be doing some presentations to summarize what we learned through the survey prior to 19.
Right. That's right. We'll be meeting also with neighborhoods to show them what their neighborhoods came up with through the process and make sure that we didn't get anything wrong. I want to highlight some of the work that our friends at the Department of Neighborhoods did for us. The community liaisons conducted outreach in multiple forms, including virtual meetings, social media, door-to-door business outreach, as well as face-to-face meetings, and much of that was conducted in language. We worked with ethnic media, both print and digital, and our lovely Christian did a whole bunch of interviews in language to make sure that we were reaching all those folks. The materials were provided in 7 languages, Spanish, Khmer, Somali, Vietnamese, Oromo, Korean, and Chinese. And based on our research, those are the most common languages in the neighborhoods that we were trying to talk to. Next slide, please. So the paper ballots versus online, the online ballot breakdown was about 80% white, above the age of 40. Paper ballots were mostly from non-English speakers and people of color. Most people filled out ballots live in the live in the neighborhoods, and learned about it through social media. The things that folks demonstrated to us they were most concerned about are traffic and congestion, pedestrian safety and accessibility, speeding, and environmental impacts and pollution. And those are in order of concern. The project priorities are currently being analyzed, including all of the write-in comments. Some of the projects that we got through the write-in comments are too large for us to complete in the next year, but they're definitely in the hopper for us to consider as we move forward. Next slide, please. So this was very interesting. If you look, this is a table that shows the mode share, so cars, buses, water taxi, bike, walk, work from home, carpool, van pool, employer shuttle, and other. And then we have the 2019 baseline. That's where we started out. Pre-social distancing. These are the numbers that the surveys told us. How people responded, how people traveled before COVID. And then the next column shows how they are operating today, and then their plans for after social distancing. And so what I'd like to call your attention to is the top line cars, both during social distancing, after social distancing, and our mode shift goal. So it looks like 37% are planning either right now or planning in the future to travel by SOV, which is really close to our mode shift goal. So that's really amazing. We're not particularly surprised that folks are a little bit leery about buses. I think that will change as time goes on. I'm thrilled with the numbers for the water taxi and bicycles. And you'll notice that work from home is higher than we anticipated, but that is by no means a bad thing. Next slide, please. So we found that 29% of respondents would take the bus at least one day a week, and everybody gave us some input about what SDOT or SDOT and Metro could do to make that better and easier. 19% would take the water taxi, 16% would take their bike at least once a week. So, and 53% indicated that they would telework at least once a week. And that is really good news, because it is going to take everybody doing something a little bit different at least once a week for us to hit our goal of having the same amount of mobility, even though we have fewer lanes across the Duwamish. Next slide, please. So I want to note that our next steps are to analyze the data, and we have some check-ins with the community liaisons tomorrow. We're checking in with neighborhoods on the 13th and the 17th, and we're still working out time to meet with our friends in Georgetown. On the 19th, we're going to share the draft with the task force, and in early September, we are going to start implementing. Beyond September, we'll have ongoing discussions and additional project implementation. Next slide, please. Before I move on, sorry, I forgot, Paulina. I also want to note that our friends at King County Metro Transit have released their mobility action plan for transit in West Seattle. So I encourage folks to take a look at that and read it and let SDOT and Metro know if you have additional thoughts. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Barbara Moffett and Scott Phelan, who are the co-chairs of the Technical Advisory Panel. They are the experts, along with their band of panelists who are helping us move through this process. Barbara?
Hey, thank you very much. I think Scott's going to start this section.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Yes, and on behalf of the TAP, I did want to note that our feasibility of repair statement has been made available to the public, and we want to present it here and take any questions on that. And the statement is that the TAP has not been presented with any information that indicates that a long-term repair is infeasible or economically unviable. And we therefore recommend that this option be retained and fully explored.
And I would like to add a couple of caveats to that for those that did not have a chance to review the entire feasibility memo. First is that there were a lot of records that were not available for the TAP to review from post-construction. Some of the as-built shop drawings, field notes, even the calculations were not available. So this is relying heavily on the non-destructive evaluations that have been done to date. Secondly, SDOT stated that the bridge would not have to be brought up to current seismic standards. It does not mean that if a repair is chosen that it wouldn't be, but just that at this stage, as we are evaluating whether a repair option should be further evaluated, it was not required. And then lastly, the number of travel lanes and the service life, how long we will have a bridge that's repaired, is still to be determined. And that will enter into a risk analysis that we will talk about later in this presentation. But we just wanted to kind of put those out there to let you know that there were some caveats we are evaluating. The memo is a point in time. And as things change, if there is an assumption that we have made that is significantly changed by further information, we may need to reevaluate that. But we also wanted to give an opportunity for the panelists to be able to ask questions about the memo. We hope you've all had a chance to review it. But at this time, and as you will see in the CBA, we are moving forward with one of the options being looked at is the feasibility of repair. So I do see a question on no as-built for the TAP. So you have to met the part of this is COVID. So some of the repositories where some of these records have been retained, we are not able yet to access them. That's why I gave that caveat that as information becomes available, we can actually evaluate this further. But the non-destructive testing and evaluation and the surveys that have been taken give a lot of information. There is good, solid information for us to move forward with. All of those, both with the engineer of record as well as on the TAP, have enough experience to be able to make valid assumptions to move forward with this. But it is something that we will continue evaluating as more information is available.
And Barbara, if I could add, we do actually have as-built drawings. We don't have the shop drawings, and we don't have the stressing records, and that's related to the COVID situation. But we do have the as-built drawings. We do have them.
Okay, sorry. I had to have a little moment there.
Perfect timing, Heather. I think that the memo, if there are further questions, you could feed them our way if they do come back to you, and the TAP would be glad to answer them.
So I do want to note, especially for Deb, we have as-built or drawings that are labeled as-built, but the elevations indicated on the as-built are there's no way they are as-built. There's no way they are accurate. And so, Deb Barker, we did provide those drawings to the TAP, but they cannot be considered as-built drawings in any real engineering sense. Barbara, do you want to? We did not provide information to the TAP. The TAP received everything that SDOT has. Barbara, can you clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, and just to clarify even further is that there has been extensive work on the part of SDOT to provide the TAP with everything possible that they can obtain, and we do have a lot of information. So when I state that no as-built, for instance, what Heather was saying, the elevations were to the 0.001 inches in alignment with what the contract drawing stated. And just from a construction point of view, there would be a slight difference. And so having them that close gives some question on it. But SDOT has been very responsive in giving us everything possible. I was just trying to emphasize that we do not have all of the records. As Scott mentioned, the liftoff, the stressing, some of these pieces of information that aren't available can add clarity as they become available and as we are able to get additional information.
I do see one other question on about the seismic, and Barbara can follow too on this. So our statement today is independent of the seismic. It's based on whether it's feasible to repair or replace, and so that's going to be focused on independent of the seismic. But if the decision is made to repair, then the seismic upgrade possibility will come in independent of that choice.
That's right.
And just to summarize, if I may, I think we can go back to what Matt Donahue stated a number of meetings ago, is that even though it can be repaired, is it advisable to repair? And that's really where the CBA comes in, and where the benefit of using the CBA is that you can repair it, but be at the point where it's really not advisable to do that. So that's where the CBA, with these attributes and the focus of how you quantify and apply these different attributes to the different costs, will help in the decision-making process. So with respect to the seismic code, we could add that in. That would have an impact on the cost of it. And the feasibility, but that is not what the point is. Can it be repaired or replaced? And that's really where the CBA helps with what makes the most sense for moving forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barbara and Scott. If it's okay, I want to move into a discussion of the cost-benefit analysis, and we'll be hearing from Barbara and Scott more as we move through this discussion. Next slide, please. So there's been some questions and some confusion about the cost-benefit analysis, so I just wanted to state what the cost-benefit analysis is and what it isn't. So it weighs the pros and cons of multiple options to inform one specific decision. Are we going to repair the bridge, or are we going to replace the bridge? And I say replace the bridge because we are replacing a bridge. However we replace it will come in a little bit later. It is not a tool for evaluating the pros and cons of different kinds of replacement options, including whether we should build a bridge or a tunnel. Those questions will be explored in the alternatives analysis, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It will not provide us a precise cost estimate, though it does consider costs. So you may know that as you get to higher and higher levels of design, your cost estimates become more and more precise. So we're at like 0% design. So the cost estimates that we're going to take into consideration at this point are very, very high level and very, very imprecise. So it's so critical that it's going to be layered on top of the attributes. So it's not an attribute, but it's going to be layered on top of the attributes and factor into the final quantitative discussion. We'll discuss that a little bit more later. Next slide, please. So the cost-benefit analysis will help us decide whether to repair or replace the bridge. It's going to focus on in-kind replacement or partial replacement. And in-kind means same alignment, same kind. An in-kind replacement is on that same alignment. An immersed tube tunnel, which is not an in-kind replacement, will be part of the CBA. So everyone can set your fears to rest. A bored tunnel will not be part of the CBA and has never been part of the CBA. Barbara, did you have something you wanted to add here?
So I wanted to add that the TAP yesterday, when we had our TAP meeting, we talked about the best use for the CBA with respect to the options. We know that the community has seen a number of different options of bridge structures, so that you could, between a extra dose bridge or a suspension bridge or a box girder bridge, even the wood truss bridge, there are a number of different options. And so in order to, all of those different options are really more part of a type, size, and location study when the decision is made to replace. So if we're looking at just the repair versus replacement, we are evaluating the opportunity to pick the lowest apparent cost bridge structure to go into the CBA. And that range of alternatives gives the idea of what could be done, but we think that if you're making that single point of decision, repair or replace, on the repair side, you would have shoring and repair internal to the structure with more PT, that type of thing. On the replace, you would have the single lowest apparent cost value bridge as well as the immersed tube tunnel, so that you would have a limited review of what those are going into the CBA. A decision then is made on either the repair or the replace, and then if it is a replace, all of the suite of different options would be evaluated as part of a formal TSML study. Heather will describe that in more details later, but we are looking at whether or not that lowest apparent cost bridge structure is the right way to go forward with the CBA.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Next slide, please. So just to orient you as to where we are narrowing down the repair and replace options and applying objective criteria to evaluate the feasibility. That is the whole exercise that we're going through with you guys right now about the attributes. And we're getting your input on the attributes, and we're determining how we're going to begin that analysis. And then, based on those agreed upon attributes, we're going to score them. We're going to introduce rough order of magnitude costs. We're going to quantify the results. We're going to compare the options through the lens of the CBA. We're going to present the results to the TAP for feedback, and we're going to present the results to you for feedback. And then we're going to make a recommendation to Mayor Durkin about how to move forward. Next slide, please. So we're going through, oh, sorry, Barbara, did you have another thing to add on that one? Okay. We're going through a process of finer and finer, narrower and narrower focus. So right now we're deciding whether we're going to repair or we're going to place. And so once we decide whether we're going to repair or replace, we'll know how to move on to the next step. If we repair, we don't have to go on to a type, size, and location study. If we replace, or if we decide to repair and then replace, we do. A type, size, and location study is required for any kind of federal funding, so this is not an extra thing that we can avoid. So that will go through and identify several different options and eventually choose the best type, size, and location of the structure. Within that is an alternatives analysis that we ask the question, if it's a bridge, what kind of bridge? What should it look like? Are we going to use wood or steel or concrete? How are we going to connect it to the current system? What's the best way to construct it? How can we restore traffic most quickly? If it's an immersed tube tunnel, how would it connect to the surface streets? Where would it be built? How could it be delivered? What does the public want? So that's another element to the process. It's entirely possible that the cost-benefit analysis recommends repair option, and then we would still move forward with replacement because you can't have a half-broken bridge hanging around in your transportation system, especially not one that carries 100,000 people a day. Next slide, please. So you recall that we sent to you last week the proposed evaluation criteria, including constructability, environmental equity, forward compatibility, funding availability. Next slide, please. Maintenance, inspection, and operation needs, mobility, multimodality, impact on regional businesses, and safety and seismic. And one of the things that we asked folks to do was ponder those criteria, identify whether there's anything that we had left off, and then take a crack at filling out the attribute matrix. Next slide, please. So this is the attribute matrix that you may recall we sent you. And this requires a person to go through and compare each attribute against the other and identify in each of those binary cases which attribute is more important. And that leads us to a way to weight those criteria so that we can decide, we can give the factors related to that the most consideration as we move forward. Barbara, I believe you had something you wanted to mention here.
I did. So yesterday at our TAP meeting, the TAP panelists actually went through and did this exercise that you will be doing in a few minutes. And it was extremely illuminating and a lot of fun for us to be able to do it. And it really showed where the emphasis was from the TAP panel. And I did want to mention that SDOT is receiving input on these different attributes and the weighting of them from multiple different sources, from the Community Task Force, from the TAP, from SDOT itself, from from the engineer of record as well. And so we just want to say that we really appreciate the fact that SDOT has to now then compile all of this and come up with a single rated system that takes into account all of these different considerations. So I just want to say that we had a lot of fun doing it, and I look forward to seeing what the Community Task Force comes up with today.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I appreciate that. Next slide, please. So I do want to thank the 8 or so Community Task Force members who sent us feedback on the attributes as well as filling out their matrix. So just to summarize, constructability is everything. We agree that is a really important thing. Difficult to separate environmental from equity. That's true. It's also difficult to separate mobility from equity. And as I hope I mentioned, or as I need to mention now, the Suquamish and the Muckleshoot tribes have treaty fishing rights with the United States of America for the Duwamish River as well as Elliott Bay in the case of the Muckleshoot and Elliott Bay in the case of the Suquamish. Those treaties are the law of the land. Those aren't optional things for us to ponder. So we were wrong to include those in the equity piece. Those are the law of the land. And that's just a really important note. Mobility refers to how a repaired or replaced bridge would improve or detract from mobility. Can we go back 2 slides? Does the preferred alternative facilitate or hinder the movement of people and goods? How will it impact local and regional traffic? That's what mobility means. Let's go back, or yep. Okay, go to the next one. Great. Nope. Back one. Sorry, Adonis. We absolutely agree that maritime is critical for our economy and for individual success. We know that the bridge needs to be maintained. I think if there's something that has come out of all of this, it is more clarity for everyone about the criticality of having sufficient maintenance funding. So this is a question about adding something about the impact to the community for funding. So I do want to note that we just released an RFQ for a traffic and revenue study, and that is where the impact to the community on the possibility of tolling would be considered. Criteria should account for both short and long-term impacts to regional businesses, and equity requires developing ways for people who can least afford it to economically get around. That's exactly right. And I do hope that that everybody considered that. It looks like we have a question from Katie Garrow. Katie?
Hi, Katie Garrow, MLK Labor. I just had a suggestion for an additional criteria we might contemplate. Is now a good time for me to offer that?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think it fits neatly with the first bullet point on our slide and the last bullet point on our slide, but something to capture the impact on community workforce. So thinking about jobs that are created, vis-a-vis whatever process we select, and impact on existing jobs. And I think this is inextricably tied to equity because, you know, if we're doing our job right, we're providing good family wage jobs to community members who are the furthest from economic opportunity. But I think somehow evaluating that might be useful for us as a decision because all infrastructure projects are, in fact, jobs programs.
Too right, Katie. I wonder if I feel like that question is addressed in impact to regional business, mobility, and equity. So I feel like that's the concept of like the jobs it's going to bring and the access that it's going to bring are folded into those attributes. How does the panel think about adding an additional attribute?
And then just for the panelists, I want to acknowledge that the breakout groups will also be a great time to have more
talk about that.
discussions about those, and then bring them back to everybody. So I think it's a good starter example of the types of questions that people could be asking the breakout groups and where they might or might not be fitting in existing criteria.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael. Just quickly so that we don't cut in too much into the breakout sessions. Next slide, please. Clarify, okay, how long? That is definitely part of the CBA. Tolls are being considered. We have a RFQ out right now for someone to do that work. Wondering if housing costs would be something to consider here, and how we measure safety. It is safety for drivers and pedestrians. It's safety across the traffic system, which is everything that removes anything that moves in the right of way. Next slide, please. So of the responses that we've already gotten, the most highly weighted criterion was seismic and safety, followed closely by mobility and constructability. Next slide, please. Okay, over to you, Michael.
Actually, before we break out into these breakout groups, I think Scott and I wanted to just take a quick moment, Heather, and mention what the TAP's next focus or where we're currently focusing right now. So, Scott, would you?
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. And I also wanted to, there's so many people on the call or WebEx, just remind you that the technical advisory panel, we are independent of the community task force, and we report directly to Lorelei Williams and to Sam Zimbabwe. And though they have not told us to hurry it up, we're going as fast as It's been implied. Okay, so we are working on it, and just want you to know that. And so going through these attributes, these are very important for us, and we're anxious to see what you come up with as well. We know that this is what is important to the community and to SDOT. But for the TAP, we are primarily focused on the technical feasibility. Right now, the technical feasibility of repair or replace. So we will be looking at the attributes. We will be in the breakout sessions with you. But we are also, or even primarily, we're looking at the basis of design, not just the attributes, at both possibilities. That's our immediate task.
And also, with respect to the cost, it is a cost benefit analysis. We have the capital cost for construction. We have the life cycle cost for the long term of it. But there's also a component that is added on at this stage for the CBA in risk. And so what we do is we assess the different risks, as we mentioned in our repair technical feasibility memo, that the number of lanes or the service life are not necessarily identified at this point. That is captured in a risk register. And after the risk register is developed, they are quantified and monetized. And so the risks that are associated with the different options will be monetized and added on to the cost of this. So as we do the cost benefit analysis, it is comprehensive, not just of the perfect scenario, but captures the risks as well.
Okay. It looks like we're cutting in a little bit into our time for breakout groups. So, Michael?
Yes. So.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Paulina.
I just wanted to remind the community stakeholders that we designed these meetings so we can have a deeper conversation about the criteria and the questions. So we will be bringing this back into when we report this. So I want folks to feel frustrated that they couldn't really mention some of the additional. There was a question there of how many people of the stakeholders we were able to send for feedback. And Heather, I don't recall that number exactly, but we did get some feedback on those seven. Looks like seven people responded. But the important thing would be to discuss today that we will be able to elevate those discussions as well. Also, I do want to be conscious of last recommendations, since this is a long time meeting, to have a little bio break. So I'm going to suggest that before we get into the breakout group, we get a couple of minutes, meaning to come back exactly at 1, and we're running out of time because we have planned to have 45 minutes of discussion. Michael, sorry I interrupted you. Something else that you wanted to add?
No sweat. Let's go ahead, Adonis, and jump ahead 2 slides so people can see the breakout groups that they're in. And I would recommend that people, what we will do is we will lead this call and we will go into our appropriate breakout group. Everyone should have gotten a calendar invite with the appropriate link to Group A or to Group B. But we will also, as we've done in the previous, put into the chat links in case you don't have something on your calendar. Find your way there, put your camera off and self unmute. Take a moment to use the restroom, but then please come back, because this will be a time where everyone has an opportunity to talk at much greater length with the presence of our TAP co-chairs and others about the CBA, the attributes, and there will be an additional opportunity at the end of this for people to provide additional feedback and actually weigh in on what they think are the most important things for consideration that will materially impact the outcome of the CBA. So let's.
For 45 minutes, we've got a couple of issues that we're supposed to, and hopefully we'll get to during this time. One is to talk a little bit about the Reconnecting West Seattle, what you've heard in the community, what your thoughts are, and issues and questions that you think need to be addressed. And then the cost-benefit analysis and kind of where you are on that, what you think is good about it, what you think needs to be changed or what you think needs to be explored more fully. So with that, Reconnecting West Seattle. So what have folks heard about the plans in your areas?
Hi, this is Erin. I still continue to hear concerns about, the traffic backups in SoDo. And we did get a little bit of feedback on the survey. We didn't have as many people from SoDo fill it out as other neighborhoods, but the number that filled it out for SoDo, I think, is a record for a survey out of SoDo. So we're feeling pretty proud about that response. And there was concern that some of the projects were projects that are already undergoing and underway and have different funding sources. And there was a concern that that there was less, even the projects that seemed to be aimed at freight were really aimed at bicycles. And there was a lot of concern about extension, adding additional bicycle lanes to 1st and 4th. And that raised a serious panic reaction in some of my businesses.
That freight movement would be compromised in some way by new bicycle lanes in those areas.
Right, because we have the SoDo Trail on 5th, and there's new protected bike lanes going in on East Marginal, and that's a project that's been underway. And there's some reference in the survey and to 1st Avenue and to 4th. And for 4th, it's less about freight movement and more about, we have several industrial businesses along 4th that have to load large trucks, which means they often block 4th Avenue with their trucks and are concerned about the potential to add bike lanes on either of those streets, both of which are heavy haul streets. And it seemed like the combination of bikes and a heavy haul street didn't make a lot of sense.
Were there any, where are the choke points in SoDo that you're concerned about?
The choke points that we're concerned about is definitely Marginal and accessing, as John mentioned in our previous conversation, the port has days that ships come in, and so those days it could come to a total standstill. It kind of already does, and because there are so many tracks stacked up, and then if we're trying to move, commuter traffic through that, and a lot of these trucks start lining up at 3 or 4 a.m. so that they can get in line to get through the port system. So they're already in place prior to peak AM. The other issue is around, we're very excited. We've heard from the Lander Street team that we are looking at a September opening of Lander Street, which is going to be amazing. But we do have, even prior to that, we do have some choke points around 4th. And this is based on the Seattle Squeeze data when all of that traffic moved off of 99. We saw a lot of choke points on 4th by Spokane. And during that process, the city deployed SPD officers to direct traffic at kind of our key choke points. And that was very successful. So that is something I just want to flag for this group, that as we start to return to normal traffic, whenever that may be, that, some traffic control may be very helpful in SoDo. Okay.
Deb, you've got your hand up. Deb, I've got a request for you, and you reported back for us, for my group last time, 2 weeks ago. You had kept very good notes. So I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to do that role again when we go back into the larger group. And if there's no objection to that. Great. Unmute. There you go.
Yes, I believe I can do that, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to share things that I've heard from the communities about the priorities and the survey. This is a quote: "The surveys are crap," is what I've heard. And I've heard this, unfortunately, from folks who are in the neighborhoods and folks who are in higher echelons within the city. But the surveys are crap. Highland Park community had a very long list of issues. Many of their topics of concern were things that Aaron just referenced, with duplication, things that are already funded and technically should be underway, are listed. And why would you have to vote twice? I know that SDOT has been trying to explain that, and I had a very long reply from Danielle with SDOT about that. That it's the first temperature taking, if you will, in a COVID kind of way, but not COVID. But still, the neighborhood, definitely HPAC, Highland Park, and its surrounding area was very concerned and fairly dismissive of what's in the documents. And so that was disheartening, because HPAC is a really savvy group. And if they were thinking that the survey wasn't worth the price of beans, I feared for it. So I was trying to let folks know and share HPAC's concerns. The issues and questions that I'd like to see addressed in the draft plans are how to really take a look at beyond these actual Reconnect West Seattle surveys in the ongoing, and how to deal with areas and assist areas that haven't been included within the surveys. I've personally been working with the Sylvan Way neighborhood, trying to get them into the loop, if you will. But Fauntleroy has expressed concerns dealing with ferries and that sort of access. And then I think everyone is really worried about what happens with the West Marginal non-freight detours, and how that when all of that traffic goes to the upper peninsula, if you will, instead of taking West Marginal Way to, if any further restrictions are put on West Marginal Way. So those sorts of things need to get addressed in the draft plan.
When you say more restrictions, what?
There's as Heather shared with us, I can't even remember when anymore, Heather. The focus on West Marginal Way of a freight priority corridor, and however that occurs, if that reduces lanes for non-freight, where those vehicles go. Because not all of them are going to get on the bus.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the Reconnect West Seattle, what you're hearing in your area, what concerns you have?
Dan Austin here. One thing that I've had pointed out to me, and I just would like a little clarification on West Marginal Way, people were hoping that would get addressed, is that the pump out by the Longhouse where they're providing the pedestrian safety access.
Yeah.
Just an SDOT question. It looks like there's room for a sidewalk to go in there. Why is there not a sidewalk built in reopening that second lane? Is that a funding issue, or is that not technically feasible?
Was that Dan? I missed who was talking.
I think that was Dan, yes.
Yeah, that was me.
Good question, Dan. We're actually working on a new profile for West Marginal Way that's not quite ready for prime time, but part of that new profile is immediately adding a low-cost sidewalk right there, where there's sort of a kind of a goat path. We're going to make it a little smoother and nicer and cut back the blackberries so that there's more pedestrian access.
But would that open that lane back up that bottlenecks in that one section if there was a sidewalk put in?
No, what that's about is people crossing the street, and so it's shortening the crossing distance. What would change the need for that is a traffic signal right there at the Longhouse, or near the Longhouse, which is under consideration. It's under consideration. It's pretty expensive, and it's going to take a while because we have to work with the railroads to get permission to put it in. And I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of working with the railroads, but it's not easy or quick.
It's not pretty.
Thanks for addressing that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Heather, I need more clarification. not so much survey instrument as it is with what we're doing on the ground. To me, in my personal experience, the biggest choke point is the intersection of West Marginal Way and Highland Parkway and whatever the street name is to the east.
You and everyone else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Me and my 3,000 closest friends at any given time. So what is the opportunity to re-engineer that intersection in a manner similar to what Chelan and Spokane? You guys did some immediate work there that gave people an opportunity to see where they were going and get in the right lane at the right time. So what can we do to the capacity of that intersection and the throughput?
I'm not a traffic engineer, as you know. I do know that there are some channelization. Channelization means the lines on the street. There are some channelization changes that we could make. There are very few things we can do from a signal perspective. One of the things that we have to, it's a very, very complicated, very heavily used intersection.
Yes.
And so we have to make sure that whatever change we make doesn't make it worse inadvertently. And so the traffic engineers are being really careful to make sure that whatever change we make there is going to be a good, positive change for all the movements. I think one of the things that you're seeing right now is that intersection used to be a lot more about freight than about individual vehicles. And so I think the additional volume, as well as different kinds of people experiencing what it's like, are creating some of this interest. And so the traffic, this is like our number one spot that we're cracking our heads trying to figure out what to do. And I wish it were as simple as the 5-way intersection, but it isn't.
Okay. It is a very complicated intersection, and it is a very, I would guess, level of service E at best.
Or worse.
And there's plenty of concrete there.
Oh, sure.
There are large islands that have been built over time that could perhaps be undone and provide some additional throughput. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we're going to be at this for several years, I would like to see an engineering analysis of what could be done at that particular choke point to increase the throughput.
Yeah, they're doing that right now.
Okay.
They're engaged in that right now.
Okay.
I just want to say to that respect, I would hope that the traffic engineers are looking at this not with the best practices, but in the whole, this is an emergency and this is not a forever plan. I think that's probably hard for engineers to do because
No, it's not. It's not difficult for them to do. They are, however, bound by a number of things, including their license, and they are also bound by the rules that put the city at risk if something terrible were to happen. And so they're being very careful, and I get at least 3 emails a day from outside the city and probably 7 a day from inside the city about this topic. I know John Persek has some remarks. John?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And first I want to, circle back to the conversation about what are you hearing in the community. And so I want to go back to the survey. And we had a pretty good... Yeah.
Steinbrook was asking for, so let me get to Peter and then talk about what you heard. And Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Am I being heard? I can't tell.
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. For some reason, have not been able to get a hand icon until just now. I don't know. Somebody from heaven dropped in a hand icon. Wave your hand. Anyway, thanks. I just had two questions regarding the issues on the Reconnect West Seattle on freight and bike priority lists that were completed by those interests, including the port, Northwest Seaport, and the city's freight advisory board. How have they being managed together or melded, if that's the case, to balance commute interests by bicycle mode and industrial activities, whereby maritime has to get to and from the water side and the harbor and doesn't have options. So I just wanted to raise that as an issue in terms of the two different modes. And there are some incompatibilities, but not impossible to manage that, but it needs to be intentional. That's all. So I don't, if somebody wants to respond or not, that's fine. Thank you.
Heather, someone on your team there?
Well, I mean, it's just me, Greg.
Okay.
So I will say that the Reconnect West Seattle plan is going to take into consideration all of those tidbits, all the feedback that we have had from the neighbors, from the neighborhoods, as well as the feedback that we're still getting from those paper ballots. We're taking into consideration all the feedback we've had from freight, all the feedback we've had from the bicycle community, as well as the survey responses. So we make a distinction between the survey and the ballots. So the neighborhood ballots are about neighborhood traffic calming. The Reconnect West Seattle survey is about how do you think you're going to get to work, and what do you need from us to make a different kind of choice. So that's why it's going to take us another couple of weeks to put that all together into a draft plan, because we have to balance all of those needs and all of those interests. And you can tell I need a vacation, but this exactly what we are doing right now is the sort of planning exercise that would normally take SDOT a year or more. And we're doing it in a couple of months, because we need to, we get it. I live in West Seattle. You guys all live, in West Seattle or have business here or live in the Duwamish Valley. And so we're barreling through a planning exercise that would normally get a lot more time. I know there has been concern, and I acknowledge it and appreciate it, that the surveys weren't perfect. They were not perfect because we pulled them together in a matter of days in order to respond to the needs in the community. And we did the best we could, and we did the best we could to make sure that things that have already been considered weren't included. However, I would also like to note that simultaneous with the failure of the West Seattle Bridge, we also have this global pandemic, which is impacting revenue like you can't believe. And so some of those projects that everyone is counting on may or may not go forward because we just don't have the money. And so part of the reason for including some of those was making sure that we understood what is important to the community right now. Lots of things have changed since the last time anybody asked a question.
I understand those challenges, Heather. I just want to make sure that we've learned something from the missing link 20-year, challenge and the safety issues that invariably are risen through, potential conflict. So it's just about putting safety first, really. And I know you understand that. So that's
always
super.
Yeah, that's our. Yeah.
Sorry, John, that I had interrupted you, but go ahead.
No problem at all. Always good to see Commissioner Steinbruck on the call. Appreciate your remarks.
You too, John.
So, circling back to Georgetown, first of all, I want to thank SDOT and the Department of Neighborhoods for making the effort to do the outreach to get some good responses to the ballot. We got over 200, and over 200 for our neighborhood is pretty damn good. If those are all folks that live here and work here or own businesses here, I'd say that's a pretty good poll. Having said that, I know that there's always going to be a limitation to that kind of a process, so I don't have any kind of expectation that that's going to be anything other than a snapshot of everybody's current understanding and what happens to be happening right now. And I think really, given the fact that SDOT is really trying to pull this together in a short amount of time, I think it would be really worth it for a team of engineers to come down to Georgetown and just get a set of eyes on some of the troubled spots. We did have Morales come down with at least one of her staffers so that she could take a look. And it's a really quick way to, just at least get a subjective understanding of what's going on, because data just takes a long time to compile. We were able to get traffic counts from SDOT, and we appreciate that, but there's a lot there. There's a lot of numbers we have to crunch and so that we can make sense of those. And meanwhile, the process, it continues to move forward. So that's one of the things we're hearing, aside from the, the overwhelming choices, the ability to really understand what those are was, another challenge to us. And then also the remark I've heard is that there's a concern that whatever projects do get selected in Georgetown, that they need to be centered on the small businesses and the residents who lived here, or rather who live here. I know that there are projects that the freight community want that would probably also benefit our community, but I think there's a fear that the city will just simply fund those projects and say, hey, look, Georgetown and freight agree on these projects and we're going to fund them, but ultimately they're freight-centered projects. And so I think there's a real appetite to make sure that there are also projects that protect the residents as well as take care of the, quite honestly, struggling small businesses here. We've had a number already go away and close down because of COVID, and, it's not going to take much to send some more over the edge. So I just want to elevate those issues, and again, thanks for giving Georgetown a piece of this. And we do have plans to sit down with the city next week. We're working on a date, and we're going to make sure we bring as many people to that conversation as we possibly can. So thank you,
John. What are the choke points from your perspective, and how well do the project universe address the choke points that your folks are most concerned about?
It's hard to know. I'll tell you that 4th in Michigan, 1st in Michigan, Corson in Michigan, pretty much everything along Michigan are the real areas of concern, and that's especially when the First Avenue Bridge pops open during the commuting hours. And what we're seeing is the spillover into the residential areas, or we have trucks trying to travel streets that aren't designed for trucks of any length.
Right.
And there's a lot of frustrated people, and we know that that's not going to get any better. And having guardrails between what's going to happen on those major freight streets and arterials versus what happens in the residential communities, I think is going to be a key to making sure that our issues get addressed.
Okay.
So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. Ann?
So I'm thinking about the short timeline, and John, you mentioned it, and so did Heather, and that this is a really important process to go through right now to understand where we are and make decisions. What I'm worried about is that the decisions will be made, and then there's just going to be this stop on it, or I know that there won't, Heather, but that the public will perceive that this is sort of the end of the line, and so that SDOT puts some really clear reporting opportunities in place for the public, especially as new trouble spots pop up or things change or traffic increases or whatever there is, that there's a really clear way for people to report to SDOT what's going on and what their concerns are, so that they don't feel like it's the end of the conversation about these things.
Heather's acknowledging that. All right. unless there's anyone else on this issue, let's move on to the cost-benefit analysis and what your thoughts are, what you've been hearing about the direction that study is headed. The first question that I have, Heather, is remind us again of the timeline for that. It's addressing a lot of things, but it's critical to making the decision whether repair is desirable or not. So what's the timing on this and the interaction, that timing and our work?
Okay, so by tomorrow, we need to give to WSP, our engineering consultant, who they're doing the actual work of the CBA. There's math and stuff that has to be done. So we need to give those attributes to them tomorrow, along with our ranking, the weighting, so that they can factor that into their work. From now until October, there's going to be a continual churn of information that comes out of WSP, including what's called the basis of design, as well as some rough order of magnitude costs. Those things are going to come out. We're going to send them through the grist with the TAP. We'll make sure to report back to the community task force. Eventually, in early October is when all of that work will be done, and they will have a completed cost-benefit analysis. And I want to just make clear, because I live in West Seattle. I fully understand how stressful this is and how critical the West Seattle Bridge is to our lives over here on this peninsula and to the entire Duwamish Valley. So I want to make clear that the cost-benefit analysis that they are doing, we are driving them into the ground to go fast, so that we have something that is both complete and well done, but also is quick enough that we can make a decision, have enough information to make a recommendation to Mayor Durkin in early October. So over the course of the next it's not even a handful, short handful of meetings, because October's not that far away. Like it sounds far away because it's really warm outside, but if you consider that we're going to have one more meeting in August and then a couple of meetings in September, then all of a sudden we're there, right? So that's going to be done at the beginning of October, and with your input and the input of the TAP on that document, we'll be able to make a recommendation to Mayor Durkin. And I just also want to alert you that I brief her each and every Monday, so she's also following along with all of this process. Does that answer your question, Mayor Nichols?
Yeah. Okay. Peter Goldman.
Hi, everybody.
Howdy.
I'm just, one thing I think that it's more clarity in the CBA documents, and it might be subsumed in multimodal, is that whatever we do really needs to take into account future sound transit, and it's not very clear here. There is a column for multimodal impacts, and then when you look at the definition of multimodal, it sort of suggests transit, but it's not very clear. So the idea is that whatever we do now really should and must take into account our long-term regional goal of hooking up West Seattle to sound transit. And so I don't see that as a very clear breakout point, and I'm wondering if you think it's a little bit more clarity.
Jump in and say I made that comment several times in my feedback too.
Forward compatibility, the attribute called forward compatibility, is 100% about light rail.
Maybe you could use like some non-engineering legal, some sort of, compatibility with future light rail or some forward compatibility.
Well, we're going to be done with this though in like tomorrow. So as long as you guys understand what forward compatibility means, which means this bridge will be forward compatible with whatever comes along. a repair option will not be forward compatible. A replacement option could be forward compatible. That's the question here. So forward compatibility is 100% about light rail.
And just consider an asterisk or something explaining that it wouldn't take that much long, just because folks don't know what that means. And just so I think it only helps the cities that they're considering everything. That's all, just simple wordsmithing.
Okay.
And when we say it has everything to do with light rail, does that mean that it is designed to potentially accommodate light rail on the replacement, or that it's not blocking access for light rail to Capstone Crossing?
In this instance, if you, the CTF, weigh forward compatibility high, what you are saying is it is very important to you that the repair or replacement considers forward compatibility. So if forward compatibility is the most important thing to you and to everyone, we will end up with a replacement rather than a repair. So these attributes are weighted, and the repair and replace option, and replace includes both a bridge and a tunnel, just before everybody gets all excited, that it really does. So we're going to compare those three choices to the attributes. And so repair will not score well when it comes to the forward compatibility attribute, right? It will score well.
Let me push back on that, because when we talk repair, we're not talking about a permanent solution there. We're talking about a relatively short-term solution that allows us then to do replacement in a much more leisurely fashion or conventional fashion.
Right.
Which, by the way, would take us to about the same timeline as light rail plans on opening.
Absolutely. So this is about an immediate decision. Are we going to do repair first, or are we going to pivot directly to replacement? Yes, that is what we're deciding right now. Are we going to repair and then replace, or are we going to pivot directly to replacement? And so if we pivot directly to replacement, direct replacement is going to score better for forward compatibility than repair. So if forward compatibility is your top one, then repair is not gonna do well.
I just hope that the folks who are doing this evaluation know that. They
do. What do you mean? You or the engineers?
The engineers. They get. Okay, I just hope so, because it was news to me.
They invented it, so yes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask one question? Where is transit on pairing up with replacement? And also, I've had different people talk to me about, if we had light rail on the bridge now, granted this one doesn't hold it, but do we want to put all of our eggs into one superstructure in an earthquake region?
Right.
If the monorail was on the upper bridge right now, we'd be in the world of hurt because no transit would be working.
So I think Sound Transit and SDOT both are open to having light rail on the replacement structure, whatever it turns out to be. There are good reasons to include Sound Transit on the structure, and there are good reasons to not include Sound Transit on the structure. And so we want to understand whether we're in a position where we're pivoting directly to replacement, where the time available to have that discussion is shorter, or if we're going to do repair and then replacement, where we have a much longer time to pair those construction projects up appropriately, for us to have a longer conversation with particularly the West Seattle community about how changing the alignment of light rail onto the new bridge would change things. And so everybody's still open to it, but there are good reasons to do it and there are good reasons not to do it.
But Heather, the way you just described that would argue that repair and then replacement would be more favorable to a forward compatibility, because
only if we assume that we are going to replace it after we repair it. Because it's possible that we come up with a repair job that could last 40 years. I don't think that's possible, but it could be that the engineers come up with that. So repairing it immediately doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to replace it in 10 years or 15 years. It doesn't necessitate that. It depends on how long the repair will last.
When does that engineering information come out then? Because that seems like to any smart decision on.
Yeah. Well, we have to decide if we're going to pivot to replacement first. So if we go to replacement, then we'll do all the engineering, and that'll tell us how long that will take.
But if it lasts for 40, if it could last for 40 years, do we need to make that decision in the next 6 months on a replacement? Am I missing something here?
Maybe I don't understand your question.
My question is, you said we might be able to get you don't think, but they might be able to get an option where there's a 40-year repair, some other greatly larger number. When would that be determined, what the repair actually could look like? Because that
in the design, in the design. So after we make the decision to repair, we know that the repair, the engineers say that whatever repair we do can last as long as 15 years. We might be able to get longer than that, but we won't know that until we're into design. And we're not going to design a repair until we decide that that's the direction that we're going to go. So at the point where we know how long the repair is going to last, that has an implication for the eventual replacement.
And Heather,
when we're all dead.
If I could just add the current.
Oh, thank God you're here, Scott.
Well, the current repair is 15 plus years is what they're saying, and the TAP is currently questioning why that cannot be longer.
And Scott, what do we need to know in order to make that determination? Because we were talking about a shoring that would be a couple of years, which would then give us the planning time for replacement. A 15-year fix gives us a lot more opportunity to look at that. And if it's longer than that, then really the replacement issue is not on the table for a while.
Right, and we are asking WSP that right now. Actually, though, just the reality is there's at least 6 different entities asking them so many things. That is the TAP's primary focus right now. Is it? And while the contractor right now is implementing the stabilization plan, which has already started, they will learn more about the bridge. So if it continues to behave, so if you remember, the non-destructive evaluation came out much better than most people were expecting. And that's likely where the 10-year went to 15 plus. I don't exactly know how that happened, but then as they get there for more, and if they put on the CFRP sheets, and if things behave well, and they don't see anything that was unexpected, then they may have more confidence in either verifying the 15 plus or maybe going a little more.
Well, and if you really want something mind-blowing, they're not really going to know about that until the bridge has gone through a complete year of a thermal cycle. So we don't have any idea how this bridge is going to respond to cold.
That's right. I did see a hand up, but I didn't. You're right. Part of this stabilization is to release those bearings on Pier 18, so that should improve the temperature as well. Thermal reaction. Yeah.
Peter Steinbruck.
Oh, thank you, Chair Nichols. I think we're still on the topic of the forward compatibility, or maybe we've moved on, but I just wanted to make a couple of quick points there. That it does list more than just 100% light rail as the consideration. In the column that says, what does this mean? It lists, will it meet waterway navigational needs? To that we respond from the port and seaport that there is more to this in the long term. At first, I was having difficulty understanding what was meant by that term, forward compatibility, but it certainly needs to allow flexibility for future reconfigurations of the roadways in the area, the rail corridor, the possibility of the rail bridge being taken down at some point and replaced, and obviously compatibility with marine terminal operations that include maritime and rail. So I just wanted to expand on that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, the primary thing for forward compatibility with replacement has to do with there is a business that is upriver on the Duwamish who would like the new bridge to be higher, which...
Oh boy. Higher than it already is?
Okay. Yeah, that is going to be a big problem for everybody. So, well, I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to discuss that further.
We just can't ignore these long-term considerations, so we don't include options.
Right.
Okay. So anyone, we've got about 2 minutes or 1 minute, and anyone who hasn't had a chance to say anything. David?
Yeah, thanks. And this is a little bit of a left turn from what we've been talking about, and I think the forward compatibility is a great convo. I agree that putting it in late terms is going to be helpful, though I definitely ranked it high because I see the future implications. I just want to chime in on the equity component because it's a fascinating mind puzzle, factoring in equity to a public works project. And I would say echo, I personally would echo, I think is it Kelly who chimed in earlier, who may not be on the call, but about jobs and equitable prioritization of jobs. And then maybe, I mean, I recognize that this represents a lot of people in a lot of positions of decision making, which is more reflective of a lack of equity more broadly, but this is a very homogenous task force in terms of race. And just, it looks like in terms of decision making going forward, but I would say looking at equity in that matrix, I did not rank it very high, though I consider, since our organization represents a lot of diverse communities, I see that as part of my role on this task force. But I would think diversifying the voices in the decision-making tables going forward would be a good decision for a variety of voices and for meeting the equity criteria more internally. That was just a thought I had because I want to prioritize equity through this project, but I couldn't figure out how to prioritize it over constructability for it's a public works project. So I know that's a mind puzzle and it's sort of a curveball from what we were just talking about, but if some folks in my community were chiming into this task force and considering equity, it would look real white. So I don't know what the next phase of task forcing is or decision making, but I just wanted to elevate that as a consideration.
Thank you. All right, we are due back into the other group, so get yourself out of this one and find the link to the bigger group, and we will reconvene almost immediately. Thank you all very much. Go ahead and move forward.
Yeah, we should start getting in feedback and reflections from the groups, and we can start with Group A, who Colleen was very kind. I volunteer her to do it. So thank you for reporting back and for being here.
Having trouble unmuting? Could somebody unmute Colleen?
Sorry, I got it. I'm doing
okay.
pad, so it's a little different than the computer. And I also believe that what Paulina meant to say was she voluntold me to do this.
Yes, right. I did the same in my group.
So, needless to say, I'm a little bit nervous because I feel like I was on the spot. But I felt like the Group A really had a pretty good discussion. We could have used a little more time, but I think when we talked about the community, what we heard about the priorities from the community in terms of the Reconnect West Seattle, And sorry, I have to look at my notes over here. If one of the comments that was made is we really hope that the shift is going to happen for the mobility and modality to 35%. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see a lot of backups. There was also a comment about the biking. Is it really going to go to 6%? It might be, people might say that they're going to ride their bikes now, but come November, December, January, they may change their minds. And there was questions about what the other category meant. I made a comment about the feedback I heard from Highland Park and the projects that made it on the list, and how some of them were confusing and some of them were already in the works, so it was a little bit frustrating for them. And Paulina said the same happened with the South Park, surveys. And then we got some more clarification about what the community liaisons are. There was a comment about the demographics of the people who filled out the survey, and how it was a little, we're going to see more of a breakdown, but it was a little disappointing to see that it was, a primarily white over 40 age demographic. There were specific questions about Sylvan Way and the Highland Park and West Marginal Way intersection, which is, everybody knows, is kind of a mess. And then Yasmin had a really great question about how the responses from the neighborhoods and the surveys, how that's going to overlap with what SDOT is thinking in terms of prioritizing the project. So, these are lay people who are filling out these surveys, but SDOT has other, knowledge on what priorities should be. And so there was a question, and Michael addressed that. He said primarily the SDOT will be agnostic, but they're going to check in with the communities and really get the community feedback and take that mostly as the main priorities. But there are going to be times when SDOT just will step in when they need to. And Michael can jump in and correct me if I'm saying that wrong. I'm really generalizing things here. And then Paulina said we really just want to make sure that the communities are feeling heard because they're the ones who are mostly impacted. In terms of the cost-benefit analysis, I'm going to ask Bob to jump in and explain what he talked about, but he talked about lumping in, instead of the finite groups of 8 criteria, lumping them into 4 larger criteria, and I'll let him speak to that really quickly if he's on.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Yeah, I was just saying, I think we're making this potentially unnecessarily complicated. If you look at it, we've got 4, in my mind, we've got 4 major criteria here. Constructability and seismic safety are really one and the same. If you can't make it seismically safe, then by definition, it's really not constructible, right? If you look at, once you do that, you understand that it can be constructible. The goal is to hit, we're going to have objectives on this for mobility because that's what the major objective is here. So multimodal and mobility are part and parcel, the same kind of thing. You look at that and kind of score that level and say, okay, how does the different alternatives work against that? And then you got to go to the environment. And when I look at environment, I look at it as both environmental and equity. When you're doing a SEPA analysis in the state, you're looking at both the physical, environmental impacts, and you're looking at the social impacts and how you mitigate those, right? So it seems like you're going to there, and then you get the funding. Funding and maintenance and operation are really one and the same as well. Because funding, you got CapEx, and you got operation, you got OpEx on an ongoing basis, and you have to be able to do both from a funding standpoint. So I think, you get those 4 main categories. I think we just kind of broke out subsets of those to try to have a more, a stronger lens into each one of those maybe a little bit. And then regional business, the impact there, by definition, if you're going to hit your multimodal and mobility objectives, you're going to improve and have a positive impact on regional businesses. So I think we're trying to get a little overcomplicated on this a little bit. That was just my thoughts.
Bob. And Barbara talked about, from her role on the TAP, she talked about that the TAP was, considering bringing up potentially pre-weighing some of the criteria. Amanda spoke to the West Seattle Bridge now, their main criteria that they're focused on. And then Yasmin had a really excellent question about can we repair the bridge and add the light rail? Is that even feasible? And Barbara addressed that they would need to do a little more analysis, but haven't seen anything at this point to preclude that. So I thought that was a great question. And we talked about the matrix, the criteria matrix, and I just needed a little clarification about who was also doing this performance evaluation, and it's SDOT, the TAP, the task force, and then Barbara said that WSP was also going to be doing that. And then we had a general question from Tim, who basically said, and I think a lot of us kind of were nodding when he said it, but a lot of us task force members, and I don't know if the B breakout group feels the same way, but we all get a lot of questions. I know I do. Tim said he does, from like our friends and neighbors who say, why is this taking so long? So Tim was wondering if we could get some kind of bullet point list, or just and as Paulina said, just an elevator speech of just a basic layman's terms of why we're looking at a 5-6 year project. Okay. And I really thought that would be a great addition for this group too.
Yeah.
And did I miss anything, Group A?
Colleen, can I ask a clarifying question? When you're saying repair and light rail, it was the suggestion that can you fit light rail onto the existing structure when it's repaired?
Yeah.
Because I think the answer is real clear. It can't. I mean, Deb Barker and Aaron and I served for 2 years on a sound transit task force, and it just the engineering of the current structure does not support the kinds of stresses that light rail, particularly now, I think that light rail would. However, if you take that a little bit further and you think we're going to repair it and then replace it, that replacement timing is probably not too far out of line with what Sound Transit's looking at in terms of West Seattle crossing. So if you did a repair and then replace, it is possible that you could ask those questions and that there would be an opportunity to combine them if it was determined that would either save money or increase the usability of it. So
I'll let Barbara jump in because she was the one who answered that question.
Yeah.
So, Mayor Nichols, I also would like to have us focus back on the question was with respect to forward compatibility. Are we looking at two separate things? One where you could have forward compatibility with a new and not forward compatibility with a repaired structure. And we said at this time, we'd thrown out without any numbers, without any analysis behind it, just some different scenarios where it might be, if you're looking at the current structure as is, and you're just going to add light rail, that may, as you've noticed, that's not going to be necessarily functional. So we were just throwing out ideas. What about, potentially reversible lanes where you could supplement the structural strength to be able to accommodate it? So we don't have numbers behind it, but we said it's not necessarily precluded, which is what our repair feasibility was. And that's why we believe that forward compatibility is appropriate to keep within the matrix. Again, putting it back to the matrix and not trying to engineer it at this time, but just is it feasible?
Okay. Thank you.
And that concludes our, that wraps it up. But if anybody from Group A needs to jump in, if I missed something, please do.
I just wanted to thank you. You did a wonderful report back.
Yes.
Thank you, Pauline.
Deb Barker was very gracious to volunteer. She did this for Group E 2 weeks ago and had actually, before being asked, taken notes. So she's also very reliable in terms of the substance of her report back. Deb?
Hello. I may, within my report, have an elevator speech, so let's see if you can catch that. The topics covered, what have you heard from your community about the priorities and what issues, questions would you like to see addressed? SODO has concerns with the compatibility and looking at the plans that they came out, they were a little baffled and a little concerned by some of the things that are on there. It seems duplication of efforts. Some of the plans are already funded. That we'll come back to that in a minute. And they were confused that what seemed to be more of a bike sort of position was listed in the freight plans. So some confusion there about just what is really planned for SODO. I commented that I'd heard that the surveys are crap and that neighborhoods, very savvy neighborhoods who know how to get things done, were baffled by some of the things that were on the survey. Again, with duplication of projects that were believed to be already funded. And I'm just going to jump ahead because Heather had a great response to that, which I honestly didn't ever want to think about. But Heather replied because this issue of things in the neighborhood surveys being already on a funding list and possibly planned for and set for construction, Heather noted that with COVID and the devastation to anybody's budget, there is no certainty that those things that are funded are going to go forward. Therefore, it was important to hear back from those communities that those items that had been previously funded, were they still relevant? Were they still important enough to be on this list? That was great to hear, but I wanted to share that for a lot of folks. We had a little bit of discussion about the West Marginal Way at the Longhouse Museum site and some new information there about what may be coming up and what's required to reopen a lane. What is required to reopen the lane on West Marginal in front of the Longhouse to get people across that street is a signal, and that would make the lane reduction go away. But that's a long-term issue, but that is on a lot of people's radar. The mayor, throughout their discussion, asked clarifying questions about specific choke points within the corridors, and apparently everybody and their brother is contacting Heather Marks about the Highland Park Way and West Marginal Way Southwest corridor intersection that is being worked on, being redesigned. The mayor acknowledged that there is a heck of a lot of hard surface out there that could be up for grabs. Commissioner Steinbrück clarified that from the freight perspective, he hoped that the two kind of not opposing, but two different modes could be intentionally dealt with, and that's your bike commute and your industrial access to the water. And he was making a plug for intentionally dealing with that within these plans. They're two very different modes, and they need to work together. It was clarified then that the survey, SDOT is looking at the survey ballots differently than the how I get to work or how I will change my practices selections that had such a great turnout. I appreciate everybody who went and got those words out to go take that survey. But Heather clarified that this type of exercise takes 12 to 18 months for SDOT to do. And they are doing this for the West Seattle Bridge and the surrounding valley. They're doing that in a matter of months. So when people say, why is this taking so long? that may be a good point to share with them, that this normally takes a hell of a lot longer, and they're going as fast as they can. Okay, John Persak had a really great comment from the Georgetown neighborhood, not only suggesting that SDOT come and put their eyeballs on that intersection or that street, mostly Michigan and pretty much everything that runs into Michigan. But he said that it'll be key to make sure that the projects that occur there, many of the projects on the list were focused on freight, larger issues, and it's important that those projects that are going to deal with small business help and residential help be factored in as highly as the freight ones, because right now they all seem to be centered on the freight, and it's the neighborhoods that are going to be the cut-throughs or are the cut-throughs, getting big honker trucks through those small residential streets. Don't forget that component. Yes, Michigan. That's the choke point. And lastly, this was a couple folks talked about this, that the SDOT within the realm of the Reconnect West Seattle needs to talk about and acknowledge very clearly what's next. How do they just set up a plan and then everyone have a nice day until the bridge is open again? But SDOT needs to clearly define how they will take evaluation and how it will proceed in the future to deal with hot spots, new trouble spots. That's real key. We spent a lot of time within the not so much the CBA, but getting to this topic of forward compatibility. And that was one that, who knew that that's where Sound Transit relationship was was the focus. And so there was a lot of discussion that, wow, maybe they really wanted to reframe that title. And newsflash to all of us is that tomorrow is the day that all of this work gets submitted to WSP for evaluation. So there's really probably no time to meld things and change the categorizations and all that good stuff. But we were hopeful that this term forward compatibility, which means that anything that moves forward, could it have the bridge with it, things that typically are just repair, are not going to be able to have light rail on it, which we know from the ST3 SAG days, but it's anything that's able to put the ST3 with it is something that gets high marks for forward compatibility. So just an interesting way of looking at things. And also, Commissioner Steinberg clarified that forward compatibility not only dealt with ST3, but with the freight components and port components of rail conditioners, rail bridge replacement, and maybe a new business down the river that would like something really wonderful and tall. Lastly, then, this is a homogeneous task force. It was noted by David Beastock, and he felt that diversity voices need to be on the table because right now this equity looks really white. Thanks.
Well, let me just add one thing, Deb, and that is we got into a bit of a discussion, and Scott from the TAP was very helpful in terms of what repair means. When we started this process, repair was maybe we can get 10 years out of this thing. Now we're looking at 15. And that's a significant improvement from one perspective, and makes the idea of replacement a little bit different because you have more time to be able to plan that replacement and gather the resources and the like. So I think that as we go forward, thinking about the repair, a short-term repair, the shoring idea that's been talked about, which is relatively short, 3, 4, 5 years, I guess, versus a 15-year or potentially longer repair, that may be possible. And we won't have all the information on that through the CBA. We won't have it really until the repair is designed, which is quite a ways down the road. So as we approach the repair question, what that actually means, I think, is going to be important, and I think we're going to need to dig in quite a bit further on what it means, what it costs, and what the benefits of that approach might be. So, anyway.
The perfect for the next activity that we need to do.
Yes. Deb, thank you so much. Great report back. Michael, tell us how in the world we're going to do a poll using this platform.
You bet. I do see that there is an additional question that John wanted to raise, and we do have 4 minutes if we're abiding by our own schedule, which is pretty impressive that we're on track here.
Yes, yeah.
And we are going to endeavor to use SurveyMonkey actually in a last-minute audible because we got too scared about using WebEx built-in functionalities. But I'll come to that in just a moment. John, do you want to ask your question?
A remark about just the timing of replacement, I think, needs to be considered when we are talking about larger, I guess you call them triple bottom line issues. We're heading into a period where we're going to need to leverage large projects for local economic recovery because we're in a severe recession and possibly worse. So if we push this out another 15 years, there's other considerations with that, along with the uncertainty that provides for the maritime industry in terms of what will happen in 15 years. It's better that we know now than know later in terms of what long-term replacement's going to look like. So that's all I had to say. I don't want to burn up a bunch of time, so appreciate the time.
Thank you, John. Michael, so you've abandoned WebEx and we've gone to SurveyMonkey.
Yes. So Bill Laborde has chatted into the chat box a link to a SurveyMonkey, and we're asking folks to please hold this tight because we don't want to send out into the entire universe because that will skew the results from this group. But we're going to ask folks to utilize the SurveyMonkey to share with us what, based on the conversation we've had today, clear understanding of attributes for those of you who have already filled out the spreadsheet, but now might have a slightly different opinion. And for those who didn't yet, here is an opportunity to provide feedback to SDOT, to WSP, to the folks that will be moving the cost-benefit analysis forward.
And will this allow us to accommodate Bob's thoughts that larger categories that fit well together ought to be considered?
This will not reflect that. This will be just based on the criteria that currently exist.
Right. Okay.
But those types of considerations will be considered outside of that.
There's also an opportunity to provide comments in the survey.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So we'll do this as we wrap up the meeting, and you will report back at our next meeting or between now and the next meeting what our comments were. So our next meeting is August 19th.
Yes, and we, just for accountability purposes and real-time question and answers, we were thinking if folks would be comfortable and willing to delve into this now, as sort of a gut shot reaction.
Oh, okay.
But we will provide an additional 24 hours after today's meeting to fill out the actual spreadsheet that enables people to weight and rate based on each thing for people who want that opportunity. But for now, just to take advantage of built-in time in the schedule, we're asking folks to maybe put themselves on mute. And we're for, but if people have questions, they can come off mute, they can use the chat, and maybe we can just garner some feedback in real time.